There are still 55 countries in the world that impose the death penalty on serious offenders. However, among these, there are some nations that execute convicts using methods so horrific that the mere sight of them would make anyone's blood run cold. For instance, in North Korea, during an execution, the convict's parents are forced to witness their child's death. Saudi Arabia, too, features a dark twist in its execution process, one that is even more terrifying. First, let us discuss the methods of execution employed in the United States. Each year, the U.S. sentences approximately 20 criminals to death. However, in many American states, capital punishment is illegal. Furthermore, in many other states, even where it has not been officially banned, the death penalty is rarely, if ever, imposed. Nevertheless, there remain 11 states that continue to sentence criminals to death. A convict is typically sentenced to death if they have committed an extremely grave offense, such as murder, treason, leaking classified government information, or involvement in extreme cases of drug trafficking. These are the primary grounds upon which convicts in the United States are sentenced to death. Here, 5 distinct methods are utilized to carry out executions. 24 hours prior to their death, the convict is compelled to sign a document. This document provides the convict with options to select the time, location, and method of their execution. This is a significant detail, as each state in the U.S. employs different methods of execution. For example, in Washington, D.C., convicts may choose to be executed by hanging. The firing squad is another method of execution available to convicts in Utah. Then there is the most well-known method, the electric chair. It is believed that this method results in a very rapid death for the convict. Convicts in Alabama, Florida, South Carolina, and Virginia have the option to choose this method of execution. The remaining 2 methods of execution involve lethal injection and death by hydrogen cyanide gas. These options are available to convicts in Missouri and California. However, lethal injection remains the primary option in all states. Once the death warrant has been signed, a 24-hour countdown begins. 24 hours prior to the execution, the condemned inmate is removed from their prison cell and transferred to a designated area known as the death house. This transfer offers the inmate a final opportunity to catch a glimpse of the world outside the prison walls. Upon arrival, the inmate undergoes a full body search and is then issued a fresh set of clothing. Subsequently, they are escorted to a final holding cell known as the Death Watch, where the inmate will spend the last nights of their life. Most inmates are unable to sleep that night, fully aware of the fate that awaits them. 15 hours prior to the scheduled execution, the inmate is awakened. They are then allowed to bathe and are served a breakfast identical to the standard prison fare. 14 hours prior to the execution, the inmate is granted permission to meet with friends and relatives for the very last time. They are allotted 45 minutes to speak on the phone with their loved ones. The inmate is free to express themselves however they wish, whether through tears, laughter, or shouting. During this time, their emotional expressions are not restricted. 12 hours prior to the execution, all visitation privileges are terminated. The inmate is then served lunch, consistent with the regular prison menu. Following this, to seek spiritual redemption and purify their soul, the inmate is permitted to meet with a priest or an imam in accordance with their religious beliefs. 8 hours prior to the execution, the inmate is given a final opportunity to witness the sunset. They are then allotted 1 hour to write letters to their loved ones. 6 hours prior to the execution, the inmate's final meal, a dish of their choice, is delivered. However, this meal must fall within a budget limit of $30. If the method of execution is to be by electric shock, the inmate's head is shaved beforehand to prevent the hair from catching fire. Finally, the inmate is taken to bathe one last time and is then served their final meal. 3 hours prior to the execution, the witnesses begin to arrive, typically comprising the victim's family members and relatives who will observe the execution firsthand. 1 hour prior to the execution, the condemned prisoner is escorted by 5 guards to a chamber known as the death chamber. This marks the final walk of their life. Subsequently, they are strapped down to a chair or a gurney. 12 minutes before the scheduled time, the witnesses are ushered into a waiting room. The curtain concealing the chamber is then drawn back. The viewing window is designed as a one-way mirror, ensuring that the condemned prisoner cannot, under any circumstances, see the witnesses. 10 minutes prior to the execution, the prisoner is granted permission to make their final statement. Finally, the death sentence is carried out. In cases where execution is performed by a firing squad, a target patch is affixed to the prisoner's chest, and their head is covered with a black hood. The marksman positioned 25 feet away then fires simultaneously at the patch on the prisoner's chest. Friends, while the process of capital punishment in the United States may appear to be a grueling ordeal, it pales in comparison when contrasted with practices in Saudi Arabia. On average, Saudi Arabia sentences approximately 185 criminals to death each year. In this country, offenders face severe penalties even for minor crimes. However, certain offenses carry a mandatory death sentence, such as murder, drug trafficking, engaging in acts of terrorism or associating with terrorist groups, and committing acts of sedition or crimes against national security. Here, the punishment for theft involves the amputation of the offender's hand. However, if the theft is committed at gunpoint, that is, armed robbery, the penalty is death. Furthermore, individuals found practicing black magic, sorcery, or acting as fraudulent spiritual gurus are also subject to the death penalty. 3 distinct methods are utilized to carry out capital punishment. The first is execution by firing squad. Under this method, the condemned individual is blindfolded and shot at close range. This method is primarily reserved for those involved in terrorist activities, particularly in high-profile cases. The second prominent method is beheading. In this procedure, the condemned individual is taken to a public square, where in the presence of eyewitnesses, an executioner severs the head from the body with a single stroke. Subsequently, the body is crucified and displayed in a public place. However, this differs from traditional crucifixion. Rather, the corpse is publicly exhibited to instill fear among the citizenry. The third, widely considered the most gruesome method, is known as stoning to death. If an offender is found guilty of sins, such as adultery or rape, they are buried in a pit dug into the ground, submerged up to their chest. The public then proceeds to hurl stones at the individual until death ensues. To prolong the agony and the dying process, relatively small stones are deliberately chosen. However, this specific method of punishment is extremely rare, as securing a conviction requires an overwhelming amount of evidence. Moreover, partly due to international pressure, beheading is often selected as an alternative to stoning. Unlike in countries such as India or the United States, there is no prolonged waiting period for the execution of a death sentence here. Once the sentence is pronounced, it is carried out within the very same year. Once proven guilty, the condemned prisoner is incarcerated at Al-Hayr prison. Here, they are not kept in isolation. Instead, they are housed alongside the general prison population. Moreover, prison conditions here are profoundly inhumane. To intensify the psychological torment of the condemned, they are denied even the opportunity to meet with family members. Currently, in most developed democratic nations, capital punishment has been all but abolished. Yet there remains one democratic country in the world where the death penalty is still administered through inhumane methods. That country is Japan. On average, approximately 7 individuals are sentenced to death here each year. Capital punishment is imposed upon offenders who have committed murder or acts of treason against the state. In most countries, inmates sentenced to death are informed of their impending execution well in advance. However, the situation in Japan is somewhat different. The condemned prisoner learns of their impending death only 2 hours before it occurs. This means that from the moment of their incarceration, the offender has absolutely no idea what fate awaits them. To further exacerbate their psychological anguish, these inmates are confined in solitary cells. A prisoner may remain incarcerated in such a cell for several years. Within the confines of this cell, they sit and count down every passing moment, anticipating the arrival of death. Yet they have no clue as to when that moment might strike. They remain certain, however, that death is inevitable. Every day they go to sleep plagued by fear, anxiety, and mental torment. Upon waking, they wonder if this might be the final day of their lives. At night, they drift into sleep haunted by nightmares, fearing that they might be roused from their beds at any moment to face the gallows. And so, throughout the entire day, they sit in their solitary cells, tormented by that same recurring nightmare. The date of the execution is determined by the Minister of Justice. 5 days prior to the scheduled execution, the minister signs a death warrant. Subsequently, the condemned prisoner is informed that they have only 2 hours left to live. In their final moments, they are offered nothing more than a single cigarette and a few snacks. In Japan, there is only one method of capital punishment: execution by hanging. To carry out the sentence, the condemned prisoner is led into a chamber. On the floor of this chamber, there are 2 markings outlined in red. Directly beneath this red-marked box lies the trapdoor of the gallows. The condemned prisoner is positioned inside this box. Next, their eyes are blindfolded and a black hood is placed over their head, along with the hangman's noose. Then, upon receiving the order, 3 guards stationed outside simultaneously press 3 separate buttons. Of these, only 1 button activates the trapdoor. The other 2 are dummies. The reason for having 3 buttons is to ensure that no one knows who is ultimately responsible for the execution. However, the most harrowing aspect is that the convict's family is informed of their fate only after their death has occurred. This means that from the moment of imprisonment until the moment of death, the convict's family endures a continuous state of psychological torment. Indeed, North Korea stands as the only nation in the world that administers capital punishment through such profoundly inhumane methods. Here, one can face the death penalty for even the most trivial offenses. There is no specific list of crimes exclusively designated for capital punishment. Protesting against the government, being apprehended while attempting to flee the country, watching foreign television programs or movies, failing to display portraits of the Kim family in one's home, or even simply possessing a Bible can all result in a death sentence. To execute convicts, they primarily employ 4 methods: execution by firing squad, beheading, hanging, and perhaps the most terrifying method of all, execution by missile strike. However, these executions are not carried out in secret. Rather, they are performed in the presence of the entire citizenry. Furthermore, the convict's family is strictly mandated to be present while the execution is being carried out.